Once a dream did weave a shade o'er my angel guarded bed, that an emmet lost its way, where on grass methought I lay. Welcome to the Troubadour Podcast. Today we will be going over a poem called A Dream by William Blake. Now, this is the second to last poem in the Songs of Innocence by William Blake originally published in 1789, republished with new works called the Songs of Experience in 1794. And they were put together in the book that we are reading called Songs of Innocence and Experience, showing the two contrary states of the human soul in 1794. Now, a dream is a very, I think, telling poem for the time. And I think it helps us in looking at this poem and understanding many of the ideas and viewpoints of the English Romantics, which is what we've been studying lately if you're following along at troubadourmag.com. And if not, that's okay. This will be a standalone product, just like every single one of the videos I try to do standalone. But if you do follow along, or if you know a little bit about it, we have been exploring these English Romantic poets of the 19th century and the impact that they have and what they were trying to say in the world that they were saying, and then the value of the art that they had or that they created. And so I think there is a lot of value for historical, for an educational standpoint, but in here, and like all artworks, I think there is just experiencing what they wanted you to experience, whether you agree or not. And I actually disagree with certain fundamental ideas, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in these poems, in this poem in particular, some philosophical ideas that I do not think personally in my, I'm not an expert on philosophy, but I've read a little bit of it and I've studied it a little bit. My understanding is, and that I personally don't agree, but I think that a lot of people to this day agree. I think a lot of writers to this day agree with the William Blakes, the Samuel Taylor Coleridge's of the world, of the English Romantic period. Now, getting into A Dream and what this poem is, and let me give you, actually, before we read it, I actually want to tell you the summary up front, which I don't normally do, but I think it'll help you when you listen to it. There's a couple of words, two words I think that might help you to know ahead of time, and we'll bring them up. I'm just going to say them really briefly. The first word is emmet, E-M-M-E-T, which I mentioned when I was reading the first stanza at the beginning. You heard emmet actually means ant, A-N-T, not Aunt Shirley. This is an ant that crawls on the ground, right? It has a queen and that lays lots of ant eggs. And then benighted. And that is a word that actually means pretty much what it sounds like. It, be night in a sense. It's not like benighted, like you were benighted, K-N-I-G-H-T, like you became a knight of the round table. But this is like it became night. And, the main sense I think in this context is that overtaken by darkness. And if you remember, if you've been following, this is a theme in many of the Songs of Innocence that we've been reading. The echoing green, if you go back to that one, that's a great example of, you have this quaint, beautiful image of these children and families playing on the green. It's an echoing green. It echoes from generation to generation. But then as they pack up and leave, the very last minute or line is the echoing green that has been the repeating line throughout the stanza, all of a sudden becomes the darkening green. And that gives you pause, and it kind of shades when you reread the poem, knowing that that's happening and you think about it from that context, it gives you a whole new understanding of the meaning that he's trying to convey about innocence and experience. And again, how they, what the nature of innocence and experience is and how they work together. So those are the two words. The summary is very simple of this poem, A Dream. And it's basically just a speaker tells a fable in the form of a dream that he had. And the fable is a mother ant has lost her way in the night and fears for her children. And then she goes out looking for her child and has some help along the way. And that's basically it. And it's a very short poem, but that's essentially the summary. And it's, we'll talk a little bit more about it in depth as we read it. But I think this, like I said at the beginning, I think this is a very important poem for understanding the era. Dreams were much more revered by the Romantics than I think any other time, maybe besides ancient times. It's pre-Freudian. So if you know much about the Freud's view of analyzing your dreams and having dream journals, and they always represent something specific in your own inner psychology. I think a lot of that viewpoint comes from his reading of Romantic and of literature in general, but also of the Romantics. He's coming out of this period of the Romantics, and they really took dreams seriously. I want to show you a painting, actually. This is one that let me remove my image here. This is by Fuseli, I believe it's how you pronounce his name, Fuseli, in 1781, called The Night Mare. This is where I believe we get the term Night Mare, and you can see in the corner this mare, this black mare with its crazy eyes looking at this woman, and she has an imp on her chest. Now, this in 1781 came to Fuseli as a dream, and it was a powerful dream, and he had to, the image and the view of this woman who's passed out, fainted. Something has happened to her, and she's maybe just sleeping in a wild form where her arm is draped down. And again, there's this monstrous looking little imp on her chest, and is being watched by this mare, right? If you're watching the YouTube video, you can see, this imp is, and there's like this red curtain. I mean, it's something that you could definitely spend a lot of time. I don't know where this is located right now, but you could spend a lot of time analyzing. I mean, look at the wild eyes of the imp. And then, of course, the woman's draped look. And then you have this wild, looks like the eyes are white, of this mare. And it almost looks, fearful. I mean, it's a terrifying image, really. And it came to Fuseli as a dream. There's a book called The Castle of Otranto that came to the author as a dream. And this, by the way, is The Castle of Otranto is called a Gothic tale. It's where we get Gothicism from. And it comes as a dream. And this view of dreams becomes really important in this era. This view of what dreams are, where they come from. And there's a battle philosophically that starts to occur, I believe, in this era. And the battle, one way to look at the battle is the empiricism or the sensationalism of John Locke versus these romantics who believed in pre-ideas or innate ideas, ideas that come ahead, like you're born with ideas. So the romantics, and we talked about this in some of the other poems I've been reading, the Blake in particular. So all the romantics, the six romantics we're looking at in the English romantics, remember, are William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and William Wordsworth as the first generation. And then Percy Shelley, John Keats, and Lord Byron are the second generation of English romantic poets. The main poets that we think about are the big six. And they had very wildly different views on certain things. They agreed on certain things. They all basically revered the imagination and the individual. They believed vehemently in the individual and especially in the imagination. They had varying views on how the philosophy of things. So I don't want to. My point is I don't want to make this sound like all the English romantics and all the romantics in Europe at this time believed this, But in particular, Blake and I think Coleridge really believed in the idea of innate ideas that you're born with. And this is one of the reasons why Blake is so focused on innocence and childhood. Because if we're born with innate ideas, if in a sense we're forged by a creator ahead of time and we're put in the womb in a sense, right? Or we're sparked in the womb by some transcendental being, then one aspect or one way to look at that, if you take that idea seriously, is that the younger you are, the closer to God you are, right? Because, Earth is almost kind of separated from God in a very important or fundamental sense. We don't see him anywhere. But this miracle of birth, that's when God touched you, and you were just with God right before that, right? Right before the birth moment happens, or not the birth moment necessarily, but even the pregnancy moment, the conception. Right before that, you were hanging out with God, right? You had all the ideas in the universe. You had everything in you, and this is kind of a Platonic idea. And then a lot of it is forgetting as you're born. And then, but the way Blake and Coleridge really viewed it is that there were these or innate ideas that stuck with you, and that kids were closer to God than, older people. And I think, you see this with a book like Emile and, Rousseau, where the view is essentially what we need to do for education. A lot of it is don't beat kids over the head with books and so much knowledge. Just let them naturally become educated by the world. Now, whether you agree with that or not is not the point. That's, just kind of the views that they had. And dreams were a form in their mind of, it was an expression of individuality, but it was an expression of your own individuality as processed or as experienced through this transcendental, maybe godlike, maybe otherworldly approach. And you see this in the paintings like the Fuseli painting, where there is like this, in this case, a nightmarish, thing on you, on your chest in that sense. In the Castle of Otranto, you have a Gothic tale where you have the decaying of this castle and the people within it, but then you have these enormous, ghost-like creatures. You have a huge helmet and it's just this kind of fantastical world that you're living in. And part of it is to tell you a moral, or part of what they're trying to accomplish is to give you some kind of understanding of the way that they see the world. And in a dream, we definitely see a fable that's exploring how William Blake sees innocence and the nature of innocence. Okay, so with all that set up, let's read the poem, A Dream. Let's make sure you can see this. I think I zoomed in too much. Okay, so if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, then you can see what I am talking about. If not, I'll read the poem. You can go to troubadourmag.com and I will put it up there. You can read it there, as well as the images that I used. I'll put those up at troubadourmag.com. But okay, so here we go. And it's a very short poem, so you won't. I don't think you have to have the text in front of you, although it does help. A Dream by William Blake. Once a dream did weave a shade o'er my angel-guarded bed, that an emmet lost its way where on grass methought I lay. Troubled, wildered, and forlorn, dark, benighted, travel-worn, over many a tangle spray, all heart-broke, I heard her say, "Oh, my children, do they cry? Do they hear their father sigh? Now they look abroad to see, now return and weep for me." Pitying, I dropped a tear, but I saw a glowworm near, who replied, "What wailing wit calls the watchman of the night? I am set to light the ground, while the beetle goes his round, Follow now the Beatles' hum, little wanderer, hie thee home. Okay, so let's look at the structure of this. By the way, as I've mentioned before, William Blake hand wrote or hand drew and hand colored all of these. He was a very good engraver in the 18th century, late 18th century. And if you're watching on Facebook or Troubadour, if you're listening, go to troubadourmag.com. You could see the engraving. And this one doesn't have much of an actual image that goes with it. It does have like little humanoid figures on leaves and such. But it's just kind of this, it's got these vines that go throughout it. A dream, the dream is itself kind of built into the vine. And this has, been something that we've been exploring throughout and seeing the different engravings, because he meant you to watch or to read this not on a blank sheet of white paper with black text in the way that I'm doing it, but in the engravings that he wanted to you to see it. So he wanted you to hold that book. He really wanted you to see the engravings, the coloring, the drawings or the paintings that he did in there, and they are all integrated. And so Songs of Innocence and Experience is a total work of art. And I say this every time, and I'll keep saying it in case this is your first time hearing it. It's really important to Blake, and I think he's right, that you take these poems as a totality. Reading them individually and separating them from the Songs of Innocence and Experience as a book is somewhat similar to taking out a chapter in War and Peace and trying to understand War and Peace. It won't make, you can get something out of it, and it might even be really interesting, but it's not the same as, reading chapter 30 of that book, after reading all 30 before it and the, million that come after it. And so that's kind of the idea here, is that it's an integrated sum, a unity, and he's putting these parts together, exploring the innocence and experience, the two contrary states of the human soul. So let's look at this poem though. So we know it's a dream, and it starts with a person saying, once a dream did weave a shade over my angel guarded bed. So that language, over my, or it's, put over my angel guarded bed, indicates that there's, it's a speaker. The author is, or the writer is the narrator. So it's not through the perspective of some rock or ant, which we'll get later, but the overall poem is told to us from a narrator that's saying, this is happening to me over my angel guarded bed. And so, we're going into the mind of the author. You could think of the author as William Blake. That's fine. That's probably what he meant. So he's basically saying that I had a dream. Once a dream did weave a shade. So, these words aren't accidental. So they weaved a shade. So that idea of weaving, of creating, is what he's viewing happens during dream periods. Like when you dream, it's this, it's this connection to some shade world. And in his angel guarded bed, he's in this dream state, and he gets this image, right? And we're going to get this fable that comes to his mind, just like Fuseli and the image of the Night Mare or the Castle of Otranto, and this, this Gothic tale of the falling and the decay of this castle and the people within it, and that has to do with incest and cheating and adultery and all these bad, negative moral things that's creating or causing the church or the castle to fall apart, as all these fantastical things are starting to happen around it. So that's what's happening here is, we're entering, think of it like the Twilight Zone, except we're going into the mind of the speaker here. So what does he see, or what does his dream tell him? That an ant, lost its way, where on grass methought I lay. So there's this ant that got lost. That's what he's picturing. So picture an ant that's crawling, away, and it's by itself. So we have an image of isolation. Ants are not supposed to be isolated. When you think of ants, you might see an ant separated, but for the most part, you see ants like as a line of ants, right? They're all together. So imagine there's like a line of ants way somewhere far away, and there's like a little, a hive or whatever. And then way over there is just a lone ant, somehow separated from the rest. And it's on this grass, that he was laying on. And again, this is part of his dream, is he's laying on this grass, and there's this ant here, and it's separated from all the other ants. And he projects into the ant, who is troubled, wildered, and forlorn. And so it's kind of lost, not knowing where it is. It's wild, it's sad. And then we get words like dark, benighted, which, remember, we talked about meant overtaken by darkness. By the way, another meaning of benighted is in a state of pitiful or contemplative intellectual or moral ignorance. So you could see how that could be related to benight, overtaken by darkness, if you put an intellectual or an emotional shading on the word benight. So you could think of a literal darkness, turning the light switch off, and then of course a metaphorical one that has to do with moral darkness, that you're separated from morality in some way. And so there are images we're getting. Again, you have to take try to take the image of the ant seriously as separated from a community, which it's not supposed to be. Ants are very communal, as we know, right? They're like the perfect embodiment of communist ideology, right? Like every worker ant does its thing, and it's nothing without the community. And that's what's happening here is this. So we're getting a sense of the importance of the community. So it's dark, benighted, travel worn. So it's been traveling a long time. It's been traveling over many a tangle spray, all heart broke. So its heart is broken. And then I heard her say. So now we're going to get a quote from the ant. Okay. Remember, this is all in a dream. This is part of William Blake's imagination. Oh, my children, do they cry? Do they hear their father sigh? Now they look abroad to see, now return and weep for me. So, what is her plight? What is the ant, A-N-T's, worry? It's a mother ant, and she's looking for her children. Now, whether this is how ants actually work doesn't really matter. This is where we're, separating maybe science. Do ants do this kind of behavior? Probably not. I don't know that much about ants. But this is a fable. So we're going to say yes. In the world of fable, it can do this. And that's why it's important that you really think about entering into the mind of a dream that this man, William Blake, had. So we have this mother ant. She's, imagine her like it's raining and think of like the Pixar movie. I think it was Pixar. No, Pixar was A Bug's Life. The other one that was An Ant's Life, or Ant, the animation movie Ants or something. And, where it's like it goes through this epic journey to try to find its friend, or like Finding Nemo, where it's, a little fish is trying to find its sunfish. And, that's kind of what's happening here is you have this big world. It's dark, benighted, travel worn, scared little ant, weak and faint in the world, very powerless in the world. But nevertheless, it persists trying to find her child or her children. And she's imagining that they're crying. And she asks, do they hear their father sigh? And this is a theme we've seen in William Blake, where the earthly father is basically useless. And it's about, he's impotent. And there's a godly father that's very potent, but the earthly father is quite impotent in much of William Blake's work, at least in the Songs of Innocence. And in fact, he could be quite evil. If we compare the father here, or the parents here, to the parents of the chimney sweeper, the father comes across pretty negatively in the chimney sweeper, because the father sells the boy. Now, why he sells the boy, if you watch that video that I did, I think it was a pretty good one. I give a history of chimney sweepers to give you some indication of what was going on. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, the father sold the boy, and that's not a good thing. And the mother died, right? So the mother was weak and lost, and she died, and the father sold the boy before he could, weep, 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 weep. And there's that tone that they use in those lines they use in the Chimney Sweeper poem. So do they hear their father sigh? And, so all he's capable of doing here is sighing, like, the kids are gone, right? While the mother is out there travel worn, benighted, darkened world, wildered, forlorn, troubled by the world. She's out there looking for the kids. The father's just at home's, gotta get back to work, right? Like that kind of thing. And the mother continues by saying, now they look abroad to see, now return and weep for me. And now what she's projecting is this, view that her children ants are playing and they're kind of lost and they're being children. And this is one of the things about, we get this sense that children don't know they're lost or troubled or in this forlorn state, right? Only the mother really gets this. She pictures them, and remember, this is in quotations. She is saying these words that now they look around abroad and they're like, oh, where's mom, right? And now return and weep for me. And now they're trying to find their mother. Now, in reading this, it may also mean that they have returned home and she is the one that's lost. So that's always, she's separated. So maybe she's not looking for her children. So that's another way. And that's actually probably more, now that I think about it, that's actually probably more likely that she is lost, they are not, right? So she's lost, so they, now they're weeping for their mother. But I think, you may be able to look at it as she's looking for her children and they're not, and I guess the point is, let me be clear. The point is she is definitely looking for her children and they are part of the community. She is separated from the community. Whether the children are also somewhere else separated from the community is I think a different question. I'm not sure. I think my instinct tells me she's that's not the case. The children are not like lost, like Finding Nemo type things. So I made that analogy, and maybe an improper analogy, but I do think it helps you to think about the idea of being lost, of isolation, of searching for your loved ones, and trying to get back to them. And in this case, they're looking and weeping because she's lost. And they could also be looking because she's lost or they're lost waiting for her. Now we go back in the next stanza, we return to the narrator. Pitying, I dropped a tear. So we have some pathos for this ant. So now we're going to have a savior. But I saw a glowworm near. So she's lost. She's out in the dark, the benighted, the troubled waters of the world. What do you need in the dark? You need light. What's going to give you light? A glowworm. So this glowworm comes near, and the glowworm talks, and he says, who replied, what wailing wit calls the watchman of the night? So where's this wailing, or why is this wailing happening? That me, who is the glowworm, is now associated with the watchman. And now, of course, this should, even if you're not a Christian, this should hopefully, or if you're in the West, give you some image of an angel. So we have this lighted being. In this case, in the fable, it's a glowworm, and it's asking who's crying, who's wailing, and calls the watchman. I'm the man who watches, or the worm who watches, right? And I'm the seer of things, and I see your pain. And then he goes on to say, I am set to light the ground while the beetle goes his round. Follow now the beetle's hum, little wanderer, hie thee home. So, I think definitely the mother's lost by herself, and I think the kids are just at home. So I think that's probably a better way of looking at it. But what you get in this poem is I am set to light the ground when the beetle goes his round, is that now you have the savior of this glowworm, which is an angel, that is going to guide her home. Now, we don't actually see the guiding of the home, but we can assume that now that the angel's here, everything is honky-dory and safe and sound. And, so the glowworm is saying that I'm here to save the day. Follow now the Beatles hum, follow these sounds, follow this light, and little wanderer, you'll find your way home. Okay. So some of the nature of innocence that's expressed here. One is that there's a view of the kind of unity of all of creation, I think. So we get, there are that even in the insect world, we have glowworms that are like angels, just like in our world, we have angels that are like angels, right? We have humanoid angels, we have cupids, we have these types of guiding creatures. And in mythology, we have all these guiding creatures. Even in the insect world, we have that. So there is this kind of unity of creation, that all of creation has its own saviors and despondent, ways of looking at things. And, we have like innocent child imagination and a lack of self-awareness. So the children aren't, I think, they are enjoying their own world without the mother at this moment until they start to see that she's awake or away. And one way to do this, I think I really recommend comparing this to two other poems in the Songs of Innocence. One is a cradle song, and then the second one is Little Boy Found. Also, as a third one, I'd recommend Chimney Sweeper. So, as I've mentioned, it's really important for this work in particular to really get a sense of the other things they're saying, because the children play a particular role in all these other poems. So in the Chimney Sweeper, we see the tragedy and the pathos and the difficulty and the hell that these children are being placed in, but they're placed in it because of their parents, in a sense, and because of the necessity of that world at that time. In Little Boy Found, you have a boy that's basically abandoned. He can't find his mother and father. In Cradle Song, you have the whole journey that a mother goes through, and she's singing this song, and there's some joy, but then there's a lot of sadness going on as she thinks about the loss of innocence that's going to happen to her child. And here we have, the mother is kind of lost and separated from community, and she's trying to get back. And yet the children is seen through her eyes. We don't actually see or hear or know anything about the children, right? We don't know anything that's going to happen with the children. We don't know if they're going to be, if they're happy. More than likely, they're at home, not even thinking about things. She's only imagining this in her own head. So I think when you're reading this poem and you're thinking about, what does this dream have to do, or what are we learning from this dream? And we're learning, I think, this fable about a little ant that's going on its little journey and it's lost from its community. So we get a sense of the importance to Blake of all of human creation, but even if we just look at it as an analogy, that it's an important analogy for understanding that we're all lost and we need help from other creatures to light the path home, which is a Christian theme. And again, as I've said on other shows, William Blake is the most Christian of all the Romantic poets. But one difference is that he is still very anti-church because he's against repression and oppression of all sorts. We get in this poem the power and the importance to the Romantics of the imagination, right? Because that's what you're going into the mind of this creator, and he's creating this whole little world of an ant going on this little journey. And that dream is part of, that's his imagination. And that's why they revered dreams and they thought of dreams as sacred. The ancient Greeks, for instance, had a similar view in terms of the sacredness of dreams, but they even took it as that the dreams were actionable. And they write this all the time where some general had a dream and therefore, they had to fight this or didn't fight this. And you see this in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you see this all over Greek literature. And even in their histories, they talk about how somebody thought he had a dream of this. And then you have people using that idea, like Themistocles, who says, he had a dream and it's something from the Oracle about the wooden, we have to apply to or rely on the wooden bushes or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote off the top of my head. And some people thought that it was the bushes around the Parthenon, so they had to back up. But he actually convinced them the meaning of the oracle was some, the wood ships, right? And he saw it in a dream. And so the point is that dreams are very powerful throughout this world in a way that I'm not sure that they're really resonating today. We've lost a lot of the imagination that goes along with it, of like saying, this is, we're adding to or changing reality in some way, and we don't gain that, or we don't have that view as much anymore, right? There's, although we still do that, we just don't have the view and the reverence that they had at that time. So we're getting these kinds of fables. We have this very simple poem, A Dream, which is going to be, like I said, the second to last poem. The next poem we're going to cover is On Another's Sorrow, and that's the last four songs of innocence. And if you haven't followed along, the main takeaway from A Dream is it's the simple fable of a lost ant. That's it. And he's just saying something about the nature of innocence, which is being lost, and also being separated from community and family, but that there is a benevolent unity to all of creation, where even ants have glowworms to guide them home. We have other means to guide us home. Now, what those are, he's not really going into in this poem. That's not what A Dream is about. He's just kind of giving you this very simple fable to think about, and to hopefully enjoy the sound of and the rhyming couplets that we have in here. Once a dream did weave a shade o'er my angel guarded bed, that an emmet lost its way, where on grass methought I lay. So, troubled, wildered, and forlorn, dark benighted, travel worn. So you get spray, say, cry, sigh, see, me. So you get these rhyming couplets. It's, the meter's very, once a dream did weave a shade. It has this very simple cadence to it. And so it sounds nice. It's got a good rhythm to it. It's simple, and it's a simple image. But again, I think it helps to think about entering into the mind of this creator, and that this was important to the Romantics. The idea of this is the dream that he had, that they revered this. And so we get a lot of these kinds of things where, they come to these Romantics as a dream. And that is it for A Dream. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.